All right, we're going to call this Photoshop Note Sheet 3 review. We're kind of looking over our Note Sheet 3 to make sure that we have all of the information that we need to know about this section of Photoshop. On Note Sheet 3, we have talked about blending modes, masks, and then special retouch tools that would be used to do things like make faces prettier and so forth. Speaking of faces, here's my face. I'm going to go ahead and make this, I'm going to desaturate this part of this image. So I'm going to add a hue saturation adjustment layer. And desaturating is when you drag the saturation all the way to the left. When you desaturate something, you get rid of all of the color. I'm doing that on this one because it'll just be easier for you to see what's happening. So to show you the blending modes, there were 3 blending modes that I made a big deal about in class. These are, I'm just going to draw a shape. I'm going to draw a red shape so you can kind of get an idea for how these work. So here's one red shape, and I'm going to put it, well, it's not red. Hang on a minute. That's how things go sometimes. Okay, here we go. Red. There we are. And I don't want a stroke on here. Let's get rid of that altogether. Okay, so I'm going to draw my shape. I'm going to move it up here so it's not going to be black and white like everything else. And then I'm going to copy it. So I'm going to Alt-drag and make a copy, and Alt-drag and make another copy. And then all I have is that teeny part there at the end. Let me kind of reposition these a little bit just so it looks a little different so we can kind of see it better. Oops. I'll even put little gaps in between. There we go. We'll just kind of, yeah, do that. Go over here, and I'll do this one, and then I'll drag. Okay, so I've got me some little shapes here with some little things happening. And we're going to modify the blending modes on these just so you can get an idea for what blending modes do. So we'll take this first rectangle. I'm going to leave it alone. We're going to let the blending mode be normal. Blending mode's right next to opacity. So opacity, as we all know, when we turn down the opacity, we see through something. However, we can also see through things by changing the blending mode. It does a different thing. And I'm not touching the opacity at all when I do these blending modes. So I'm on this second one. That's this one. And I'm going to use the first blending mode on Note Sheet 3, which is Multiply. Multiply is what we call a darkening blending mode. So notice it takes the light areas, it takes over that red color, and then it darkens, it takes the darkened areas and makes them darker with the red. Okay, now let's try the next one, which is Screen. Screen, if you notice, is a lightening blending mode. So it's not going to turn it the same color red. It takes the dark areas and makes them red, and then makes the light areas sort of a light see-through color. So we would call a screen blending mode a lightening blending mode. And then finally, probably the most common blending mode that you see when you're using it for things is going to be the overlay blending mode. It's kind of in between the two of them. If you notice, the overlay blending mode doesn't do it as harshly as this, but not as mildly as this, but it still kind of blends the two. So if you put it right next to that other one, you can kind of see how the light areas go light with the overlay blending mode. So just understand this is a contrast blending mode. It deals with the contrast, whereas Screen lightens and Multiply darkens. So if I wanted to make myself look like I was, you know, I don't know, a monster or something, instead of like selecting and doing hue saturation and all that jazz, I could simply take a paintbrush and just paint like over this. Of course, I would want to paint better than that. Let me take my eraser for a second, just erase a little bit off my hair. But anyway, but you could cover up this stuff and then use a blending mode on this layer. So I could say, well, let's see what it looks like darker. I'll go Multiply. And then you get that effect. Or let's see what it looks like lighter. I'll go Screen. And then it does that sort of thing. And then most often when I'm doing this type of an effect, I go to Overlay. See, that one looks kind of cooler. And then, of course, if I go back to my green brush and I start painting, it's going to paint a little bit differently because I'm in this blending mode. Now, remember, I'm not painting on a mask, so if I wanted to get rid of it, I'd have to use a traditional old eraser. But anyway, that is the concept of those blending modes. And that's pretty much that top part. So opacity we're all aware of, and I could do opacity on top of a blending mode. 0 is invisible, 100% is solid with regards to the see-through value of a solid normal layer. Okay? All right, so that is that. I don't really feel like I need to spend a whole lot of time on masks. I think you guys know masks pretty well at this point. Masks are these little black boxes. A layer mask is something that you apply to a given layer that allows us to control the transparency of that layer. So we can decide what parts we see and what parts we don't. In this case, oh, that's the front part of the girl. In this case, the girl is right here, and we see the part that is white on here on the layer mask. If you apply a mask to a layer and there's nothing going on the layer, let me unlock this. If there's nothing selected, then nothing happens, right? I mean, there's nothing happening. It puts a white box. So white means that it's ready to mask out, but to mask something out, we would have to paint in black. Now, if you have a selection first, so if I selected something first, like say my face, and then I hit the layer mask button, well now it keeps the part that I selected and it hides everything that's not selected. On a layer mask, if I want to hide something, I have to click on the mask, and when you do, it'll say layer mask up here. Reset your colors. If you paint with a brush in black, black hides. If you paint with a brush in white, white brings back whatever is hidden. So that's the way that works. And I could go all the way back in here and paint back this whole thing, black and white. And again, we should all know our layer masks. If we mess up our layer mask, we can always delete the layer mask and we get our whole layer back, so it's not a big deal. If you do select and mask, as we all do from often, when you go to select a mask, you can choose to output it to a new layer with a layer mask where it makes a copy of the original layer and it leaves the original layer. So the original layer is still there. So if you see that layer and then that layer as a copy, that means it was out to a new layer with a layer mask. Now let me delete this one. If I have this main layer and I don't put it out to a new layer with a layer mask, let's say I just put it out to a layer mask instead of a new layer, then it doesn't make a copy. It completely gets rid of the original, and now this becomes its own thing. So this is just on, oh, actually, I must not have chose the right thing there. That is definitely not out to a, I put new layer. Oops, new layer. Yeah, that put it on new layer. Here's layer mask. There we go. That gets rid of the original layer and just gives us the copy with the layer mask. So that's the difference between those two. You can still bring back up select a mask if you double click on the mask, and it'll go in here, and then you can see if you've got the wrong thing selected. As we know, we can hit invert on the mask to flip-flop it. And we can also hit invert to flip-flop it using the properties panel. That's this panel right here. The properties panel has a place where we can get into select a mask without double clicking and where we can invert, and that's in the properties panel. Okay, and that's pretty much it with layer masks. Getting into the more, the thing that we didn't spend quite as much time on this time, are healing retouch editing tools. So let me go back to the original one here. I'm going to delete this layer mask and delete all of these layers. We're back to this original picture. We talked about the different healing tools. We started off with a spot healing brush, which would let us remove a spot. So if you have, I have a big wrinkle up here, as we all can see, then you can like try to get rid of the wrinkle by just rubbing over it. Now, it's really not a tool for that. The better thing that this tool is used for is for getting rid of acne or freckles or something like that. Although if you have something that you can surround, you can also get rid of that, like so. Oops, look, I just somehow copied that other one. I don't even know what just happened right there. But the spot healing brush should remove whatever it is that you put your mouse around. You just give it a click and it goes away. Give it a click and it goes away. I'm still baffled up here as to why I gave that a click and it's changing my numbers. How weird is this? Well, I have no idea what's happening. I think it's doing something. I don't know what it's doing up here. Should be a proximity match. Oh, there we go. Wow, I must have had some other button hit over here. That's interesting. All right, well anyway, That's how the spot healing brush works. You click one time and it tries to remove what's in the spot. Now it's removing it based on what's around the outside edges of the brush. So if what's around the outside edges of the brush is, you know, a nose, you may end up with a piece of a nose, like I am, right there, around the edge of it. So you kind of have to look. It's not like the best tool for big things, but it's pretty good for acne, freckles, etc. The clone stamp, which hides underneath here, it's on this one, works just like the healing brush, which hides underneath the spot healing brush. Spot healing brush is one of those where you have to click somewhere first with an Alt. So I'm going to click on the number 1 with an Alt. And with my healing brush, I can blend that in on this other layer. So I can just be like this and paint in that, and it kind of blends it in. And I could do it again. I'm going to hold down Alt and click there. I'm going to go to this one. I can just kind of paint it in. And it's moving around up here. It's kind of hard to see, but it's moving around up here and matching that in there. Now the clone stamp, when you hold down Alt and click, let's do a nose. It will basically load your mouse up with whatever's in there, but it'll make an exact copy of it. So now I'm just painting straight up nose. And the longer I click, the more defined that nose is going to be. Okay, so the clone stamp is going to make an exact copy, and it doesn't blend. I mean, the only thing that blends around it is if it's a soft brush, but like it doesn't just traditionally blend. All right, and then there is, and both, by the way, those tools can all be done on a new layer. In our classroom, I tell you that it's best to do it on a new layer. You set it to sample all layers, and that way, if you hit down, if you press Alt, and let's say I have this mouth here, and I want to draw another one, then now this mouth is on its own layer. And I could take Control T, you know, and I can like make this mouth littler, and we can have a mouth over here on a cheek or something, or whatever kind of crazy thing we want to do. I'll go on this side where it's darker and put it in there. So if you do it on its own layer, then you've kind of got that different option there. Okay, the blur tool, the patch tool is the next one listed. The patch tool can't be done on a new layer. And the patch tool is kind of a fun one. You can select something and then use it somewhere else. Copy from somewhere else to cover it up. So like I want to cover up my mouth. Try to explain this here. I'm going to take a piece of my mouth and come over here, and that covers up that part. And I'm going to take the other piece of my mouth, come over here, and that covers up that part. Notice how it blends a little bit. Like it didn't take it exactly like this dark color. It actually lightened up and blended it, which is what the healing brush does too. The healing brush will blend the colors like this. But anyway, so there's that fun thing, and now I have no mouth. So that's the patch tool. All right, the next tool down looks like a lollipop. It's called the dodge tool. So the dodge tool and the burn tool are these two tools, and they're opposites of each other. The burn tool darkens pixels. It's what you use to make yourself look like you have a black eye or something. It works a little better if there's actually an eyeball there. Let's go back. I'm going to go to my history panel and go back to when I opened this document, so it's normal again. All right, burn tool. So I'm going to burn. You can do some of these things on new layers, but you can't do any of these three. So these three can only be done destructively. These three you can do on a new layer if you hit sample all layers. Okay, so I'm going to take my burn tool and darken up my eye. The opposite of the burn tool is the dodge tool, and it lightens. So I'm lightening this eye. So like the eyeball white is getting lighter. So that's the burn tool and the dodge tool. So just remember those two. And then the sponge tool, and the sponge tool is kind of a desaturation brush. So remember a minute ago I said desaturation is how you pull the color out. So you know how this eye kind of has fleshy tones to it? Like I mean, that's why I think it's cool, because it looks like bruises. But if we take the desaturation, it's going to get rid of that, and eventually it's going to turn gray, like I'm a zombie or something. See that? So now it's a little more of a gray color instead of all of those flesh colors. If you keep going, I mean, eventually it's literally black and white, you know, like this. Like a concrete face now here. Good times. Okay. So that is the sponge tool. It's the desaturation tool. Okay, the others over here, we have the blur tool. I think we all know what a blur does. If we had some secret number back here you're not allowed to see, we could keep going over it here with the blur tool. I don't really like to use the blur tool because we have better things under the blur filter. So I don't really like the blur tool. The sharpen tool is the opposite. So if something was a little bit not so sharp. Let's say this eye is a little bit blurry. You can kind of go over it. The problem is what it does is make all your pixels more square. So eventually it just looks stupid. Like it just gets, it's too much. See, like that's just not good. But anyway, that's the sharpen tool. It's sharp. It's a triangle. And then the smudge tool is kind of like a finger painting tool. Whatever you click on and you smudge, you're smudging it as if it was paint. So, yeah. I mean, now you can kind of see why we didn't really spend a whole heck of a lot of time on these tools. But it's important for you to know what they are. If you were doing some artsy things in Photoshop, where you weren't just using straight up pictures, you would probably find these tools to be a lot more useful to you. I know people who do cartooning, where they do shading and highlights and all of that, they tend to like these tools. Okay, so that's your healing, retouch, editing tools. For the most part, that takes care of the little table. Finally, I'm just going to go over the things on the last page, which are smart objects and filters. And I feel like you should know these already pretty well. We can make a layer a smart layer by right-clicking and converting it to a smart object. When we do, this little icon appears in the corner. That's how you know that it is a smart object. It's the smart object thumbnail. Smart filters can be created through the menu filter. You apply any filter that you want in here. That makes it smart. You're going to take your smart filter, and if you select something first, which I selected this background here first, then it's on a layer mask. So if there were other areas that I wanted to have this feature, then I could paint it in or out. Now I'm going to double click this filter so you can see what I've got here. This was a nice little, these artistic filters, which are kind of cool. You can see you can choose different filters. Now mine's only going to apply to that background because that was the area in my filter that's obeying, the white area that's getting it. But look, it almost kind of looks like a cartoon back there. Now notice I didn't get the part under her arm. So if I wanted it to look cartoony, I would click on my smart filter layer mask and take a white brush, and I would paint that in that area, and it would look like the rest of it. All right, yes, so that's that. And if I messed up, which it looks like I did here, her arm's in there a bit, you use black to paint it out, as you know. So anyway, that is that. I think the smart filters are really cool. Just remember that smart filters are created through the filter menu only if it's a smart object, and they automatically come with their own layer mask. They are nice ways to do non-destructive things. So like I could have done, instead of this one, I could have done a blur filter, you know, instead of using like that blur thing earlier. There's a bunch of different ones in here, but say this one here, this is an iris blur, so you can tell like where it's not going to be blurry and where it is. And you can decide how much the feather is around it. But there's all kinds of blur tools in there. This one's just a lot. I'm going to hit cancel. I usually go with just the basic blurs, a Gaussian blur. It's never too like crazy. You can see it changing here. And we can just kind of blur it out or whatever, like so. So now I've got both a filter of the filter gallery, and then I've also got that Gaussian blur on that background. So there you go. That's been exciting stuff. And we did something with this. You did this whenever we were doing the little macro photography, and we did a smart object with that. So you should have this information already in your notes. So now that you've gotten this extremely exciting information, what's your task for the day? Well, your task for the day is going to be to locate a picture of yourself. If you want to get one that's on your phone, or take one on your phone and email it to yourself to download, that's fine. Just make it quick. And then I'm going to ask that you do a blending mode to a picture of yourself. So let me go back to the beginning of this picture of me. I want you to do like I've done, but I want you to create some shapes. We're just going to kind of review our pen tool a little bit. So I want you to create some different shapes with the pen tool. But before you do that, let's go ahead and desaturate the picture of yourself. So you're going to go in and do a hue saturation. I'm going to pull that saturation all of the way back. And then, to be fun, we're going to make a copy of your background layer. So we're going to duplicate it and put it up here. Turn it off for a minute. We're going to use it in a minute. And so before we use that one, we're going to simply draw some cool shapes with your pen tool. Make them colors, so no black, no white. I don't care what colors, whatever you want. You can do like I did earlier and do them all the same color or whatever. I want you to do just kind of some irregular shapes. If you want to try to draw like some letters or whatever, you can. But once you draw your shape, click off the shape layer before you draw the next shape, because sometimes it tries to connect them. We don't want to connect them. All right, so there's that one. I'm going to click back on here. Actually, I don't want to be on a shape whenever I'm drawing. All right, so you're just going to draw a few different shapes. Remember, you can always Control-T these shapes too, so if you want to change the sizes of them. Or remember, you can also use your direct selection arrow, this white arrow here, where you are allowed to click on your points. And then you can do whatever you want here to these things. Oops, that one's not all the way filled. But anyway, so you can click on any of your paths. Just make sure you've got that selected. And then, you can move these around. So review your pen tool a little bit. Go move some stuff around. Draw a couple of funky little shapes. Once you've done that, let's go ahead and do some blending mode fun. And again, you can make these different colors. So you can go rainbow if you want to, for all I care. It doesn't have to be the same ones. But I want you to go through and experiment with some blending modes. And I'm not going to say that you have to use any certain ones, but I want you to pay attention to whether they're in the light and the dark and the overlay. And then there's some other weird ones in here too. Like there's this exclusion one. There's just all kinds of different ones in here, and you can play around with those and see what they do. So you're going to kind of do something funky like that, whatever you like on here. And once you get all of those applied, so we want them to all be see-through. We want them to all have some sort of something applied to them. Once you get that, we're going to go ahead and turn back on that top layer and Control-T it because we want to make it smaller. Hold Shift. Some of you are still not good about holding Shift. I'm going to do this, and you can put it wherever. And then let's go ahead and, for review, make sure we know what layer styles are. Layer styles is the old FX button. Go ahead and let's put a stroke and a drop shadow on there. Whatever color you want, it's totally fine by me. Alrighty. Just make sure that your shadow is visible. Shadows, generally speaking, this is different because last time I messed with my blending mode. If your shadows are being weird, reset them to the default, and then it switches them back to what their normal ones are. So shadow's not going to work on this picture because of where I have this located. So I'm going to go with a glow instead. I'm going to reset it too. All right, so now that I've got that on here, I can change the size, there we go, of this glow. You want to make sure we can see it because that's important. Decide how much you want to see. There we go. All right, now we're going to go ahead and apply an additional adjustment layer here. And the one that I want you to try is called Threshold. Threshold is kind of neat. It does this sort of thing. We don't want to do it to the whole picture. We just want to do it to the little baby one. So remember, that's a clipping mask. You right-click to create a clipping mask. You can also hold down Alt and click between the layers to create a clipping mask. Or, of course, on the Properties panel, you can hit the toggle button to create the clipping mask. So, have a little fun with that. After you have done that one, we're going to make another copy of this little version. Take it up to the top, and, of course, make sure this stays clipped. I've got mine all out of there. We want this top one, this new one, to then have some sort of healing tools on it. So zoom up to it and use some healing tools on it. Or even some retouch tools would be okay. So if you want to beat yourself up about it, get it? You can go ahead and, blacken your eyes a little bit if you'd like. Or just really anything. I don't care. I just want you to play around with your tools a little bit. Maybe whiten your teeth. Use the dodge tool. I don't have any teeth on this one to use. I'll lighten up my eyeball socket. Any of those types of things. If you want to, you could even go a little further with this one. Make it a smart object. And then add a filter to it. So I could come up here and do some sort of filter. Maybe do one of those artistic filters that I had in there before. That's in the filter gallery, by the way. So you can go to the filter gallery and do an artistic filter. When you do an artistic filter, it's going to do it to the whole thing. So if there's areas that you don't want it to do it to, take a black paintbrush and you can paint it out so it's not on those areas. So if you've got time, go ahead and try that out, adding a filter to that, a smart filter. I like the artistic ones because I think they look kind of neat. Some other artistic ones that we really haven't messed around with, the Liquify gallery. This is the one that people like to do. I'm going to go ahead and hit OK. I may make, oops, I'm on my layer mask. Bad girl. It may not let me do this to a smart object. We'll see. All right, Liquify. There we go. So when I'm in Liquify, oh my goodness. When I'm in Liquify, then I can take and forward warp. That's how you make like a nose point a funny direction. Or you could use pucker, which makes things littler. So if I make my brush smaller, this is going to make my eyeballs little. You can kind of give yourself a facelift. You might want to do it before you do your filter. It'll take a second, but it should eventually go through. Oh, well, it's not going to because of my layer mask. Hold on. Delete the layer mask. And then I'm going to delete this filter. Oops, there we go. So there's the Liquify. I guess you can't do both. So if you want to do another copy of this layer to do like that background blur or background texture or something, you can. All right, so you can see here, that's what the Liquify does. I know people like to kind of play with their faces. So, you know, like if I've got this one here, let me delete this completely. I'm just going to clear those. So I'm going to go to this one and apply the Liquify filter. And then, again, you've got this one, which is how you can push pixels forward. Let me zoom up. Oh, my goodness. You can see all my little facial hairs there. Okay, so you can like push it forward. You don't want to do it too crazy or too fast or it's not going to look real. I mean, not that my nose looks anything like this, right? But, you know, you can do that. The pucker tool makes things smaller. So if we go here and Sierra's nose, and we just click it a couple times, we'll make her little nose smaller. Or we can make her eyes smaller. This other one, the bloat tool, will make things a little more obese. So if you need a bigger nose, you can bloat your nose. You know, that's good times. And then there's some other that are like less useful, like for instance, twirl clockwise. You just click and hold your mouse and eventually you've twirled yourself clockwise. So anyway, you're going to play a little bit. And then you're going to post this picture that has, it doesn't have to have this one. You're going to post this picture that's got a threshold and it's got your blending modes to your blog. And then if you do some kind of funky facelift for yourself, let's go ahead and post that funky facelift on there. All right, so hopefully you have updated your note sheet number 3. You've got some of those answers in there ready to roll. And you are going to play around with that pen tool, blending modes, a threshold adjustment layer, and then if you have time, do a little facelift and liquify yourself. Have fun.